Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work on the second Tuesday of every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone who I always feel like is watching me, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
It's because I am watching you.
I knew it. All right, Charlie teaches math. And also with me is Vincent, who is looking into testing populations for diseases via two-way video screens. Say hi.
Yeah, John tested positive, so I kind of had to get rid of him.
All right, well, Vincent is an epidemiologist, and, like you said, unfortunately, it's just the three of us, as John is busy doing what I can only imagine is very important engineering things.
Did we send John to the Ministry of Love?
I mean, you're not supposed to tell people that.
I mean, is he almost out of room 101 so that he'll be back for next episode?
I guess we'll just have to check in next episode and find out.
We'll see if he loves Big Brother when he comes back.
All right, yeah, not surprisingly, we're talking about 1984 today, written by George Orwell and published in 1949. And of course, you should be prepared for spoilers if you're listening to this. So as far as the plot goes, so Winston Smith, the main character, lives in a dystopian future where any kind of activity or even manifested thoughts against the incumbent power is not tolerated. Surveillance is used heavily because everyone knows Big Brother watches you, or maybe it's just Charlie, who knows? And enforcement is via the thought police. You can't even make a sad face in front of these video screens. Very sad. Winston isn't a supporter of the party, Ingsoc, who controls the government. And while he works for the Ministry of Truth, where he updates historical documents to reflect the party's current political narrative, he's conflicted. He purchases a notebook and begins his rebellions there, writing anti-government thoughts. And he eventually meets a woman who he learns also has similar sentiments, and they begin a forbidden tryst where they hide out and talk crap about the government and have lots of sex. The party doesn't like that. Then they finally join up with another person, O'Brien, that Winston suspects is part of a resistance movement against the government, and they sign up for that. But unfortunately, that's all a big trap. O'Brien's actually a zealot for the government, gets them trapped, they get super tortured, and they return to society for a short period of time, where Winston finally admits at the end he loves Big Brother. So a lot of stuff going on there. So let's jump into some topics here. I kind of wanted to talk about how, of course this was written in the late 40s, where it's post World War II, things are getting serious with Russia. But how possible is this that something like this could actually happen? My thoughts on this, I can kick us off. In the novel there are the three big world superstates. I think that is super indicative of kind of Cold War era, where things were turning into like giant superstate type things. So I don't really feel like that's quite as possible now, where things are much more fragmented. But hell, in terms of the thought police and making sure your mentality is in line with party doctrine, oh man, I could see that happening now. I mean, you could see that, in certain, both political parties in the U.S., the major political parties, where, people talk about, buying into the party line of the inauguration size being not what it should be, or, anti-government, then you've got to buy into that party line, and you're kind of discredited if you don't buy into that. But how do you guys feel about that?
So I was thinking actually that maybe 1984 it's more close to reality if you were in a different country like China. I feel like China actually is maybe the closest of all the countries in the world to a 1984 kind of state, where there is very strong thought control, strong policing of like dissident kind of ideology and things like that. But even in China, unless you can get the entire world to be kind of Big Brother, like other countries have kind of enabled China to kind of get around some of the Big Brother-y aspects of the country. And it kind of influences the country, because the more backwards a country becomes, the less productive their populace tends to be. And if you have competition outside, then you kind of get left behind. So I feel like China's kind of has aspects of Big Brother, but kind of relaxes it on a lot of states. Like, namely, you look at like, Hong Kong and some other areas, but they just let it kind of run as normal just because they need the productivity to be high. So I think it's possible, but it's not optimal, and because it's not optimal, it's hard to compete.
Yeah, like I was going to say, in terms of reading the book, I've heard that, like, I've never been to North Korea, but from what I've heard, how stuff is organized, that kind of the conclusion of everybody loves the ruler and that sort of thing is a very kind of real goal of that's kind of how the government's built to create public opinion and that sort of thing. And plus, a lot of the stuff in the book is very specifically designed after kind of how Nazis used propaganda and like specific word. Like I know the whole newspeak thing is kind of an extension of Orwell's thoughts of like how could you continue Nazi propaganda type tools and that sort of stuff. But in terms of what had actually happened, 10 years ago I read Brave New World for the first time. And in that book, it's more like entertainment and that sort of stuff is what's enslaved the population to this kind of crazy future government type world. And I always thought like, oh, this is, especially 10 years ago when like social media was like really, really like everything taking off in terms of just people doing whatever and kind of getting into nothing. I was like, oh, that's totally how it's going. But recently with what's been going on, like, I'm not sure if it'll ever be a top-down government type thing. Like Stavros says, the whole super state thing seems a little more iffy nowadays.
Yeah.
But in terms of people, like, towing the party line and just stating things that seem
may or may not be true.
Like, not may or may not be true, but things that it's like, you sit here and you're just like, how do people believe this sometimes? Like, on both
Party
sides.
told them to, man. Yeah, and actually Vincent brought up an interesting point pre-show. Are we more likely to see this on the government level or the corporate level right now? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, the classic argument that you would make is that if there was any corporation in the world that could be like Big Brother, it would be something like a Google, potentially something like an Amazon, but much more so like a Google because they have so much information and everyone uses Google so much. And there have been a lot of kind of dystopian scenarios where like Google, corporations have been really maligned. Like, the movie The Circle and like other things. And, in my mind, it's almost more likely that a private corporation would be able to get away with some of the like surveillance, covert kind of surveillance that kind of is out there. Government entities, of course, it's very possible. Like, NSA, FBI, they might be monitoring our podcast right now. But there are
FBI.
quote unquote checks and balances, if they were to go and like try and ice us right now because we said something bad about Big Brother, it wouldn't be as you would hope that there'd be some checks and balances. But a private corporation, they throttle your bandwidth or they cancel your account, et cetera, et cetera. That type of stuff happens relatively frequently. You hear about YouTubers who get their accounts suspended for quote unquote terms of violation and stuff like that. Whether or not they were, warranted or not, of course, I don't know all the details. But to me, I kind of thought that maybe private corporations might actually be in the running to be Big Brother.
I think that's totally legit. In 1984, the government controls your expression, like literally, like what your facial expressions are. And if you're bad, you get turned into Ministry of Love. Whereas, YouTube's a great example. Like, is your expression bad? Are you saying thing X that is not allowed? You're off. No more expression.
Yeah, it's very interesting because they recently had that shooting at the YouTube quarters because they kind of cut off one person who was somewhat extreme in terms of their vocal leanings and the kind of things that they were trying to espouse. And then that person came and shot people up at YouTube. And it's in that sense, it was almost like a reverse Big Brother situation where like you would expect Big Brother to have power. It's like, oh, we cancel your account, game over. But the person's like, nope, now I'm going to kill Big Brother. And you're like, oh, it's not good for anyone in this scenario.
Yeah. Well, YouTube doesn't have Big Brother powers just yet.
Yeah, not quite.
We're watching you, YouTube.
Yeah. Otherwise, this podcast wouldn't make it out.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay, so I guess it's
Stavros, are we just part of their messaging?
We're reinforcing the party line right now.
Did you know that my Irish name is O'Brien?
I knew it. Wow, you're a very Asian O'Brien.
Actually, my beard hair does come out calico colored. It does have this weird orange tinge, and it has led to people suspect that I had some sort of Irish person somewhere deeply rooted in my past somehow.
Just get one of those genetic test things and find out, Vincent.
I'll come out part Chihuahua. That's the way those tests work.
Nice.
Wow, I think that's enough on this topic. Anyway, so
Where's Sean? Why'd you lock him away? This podcast is going nowhere.
Oh dear. Okay, so let's move on to something. Actually, one of the more interesting metaphysical discussions of this book is how they define reality. And so, if you guys recall, I think it's during the when Winston's getting tortured by O'Brien. The question came up of what is reality, and I think the definition is that reality is whatever you remember and whatever is in records. And in the novel, the party controls both of those things. Written records, obviously, because you can see Winston literally fudge records on the fly.
Yes.
But then memory as well. And it's crazy, because most people just think it's just, hey, I remember things differently. Obviously, that's not what happened. But in this book, you can see what's happening when the party literally controls how people think with newspeak and everything. And so I kind of was feeling like usually it's like it's a plot, but I was just kind of thinking about how the party defines that and how they control it in this book. And I kind of got like a little claustrophobic. I was like, oh shit, that's right. Everything I know is wrong.
I saw some things about I saw a video after we read the book. I was like about the newspeak thing, about like, is language how you think? And on one hand, yeah, it definitely influences how you think. It's kind of like, you've heard the thing where depending on what language you grew up with, you slowly lose the ability to pick up on differences in sound and voice that are typical of other languages versus you pick up on the ones typical in your own. Like, I think the classic one is like the L and the R sound are very non-differentiated in Japanese. So that's how you end up with like, the horrible stereotypes of them mixing up those letters, because that's just not part of their language. But in terms of thinking, I've read it's like certain things, like if a language doesn't have words for different types of colors of green, they're less likely to notice it. But they'll still notice that there is a difference. They don't lose the ability to recognize reality through language.
Right. So you're saying that they will still be able to think it, kind of, even though there's no word or concept for it?
They'll still be able to like feel and experience these more abstract ideas, even if there's no way to express it within that language. And then, that's how we came up with those ideas in the first place, is through attempts of expressing these things that were unworded and didn't really exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of agree with Charlie in that even if there is not explicitly words, like a word which efficiently describes what you're trying to do, there are alternate ways to get at the meaning that you're trying to get at. So, like, there's no word for launching a watermelon into space to intercept a missile or something like that. But you could describe it with many words. So, like, you can't, like, eliminate watermelon from the English language just because it theoretically could be related to, like, rebellion, right? I mean, it's just a fruit.
Right.
But you could use it as a metaphor for something, and you can't stop rebellion just by eliminating the word rebellion.
I think it would become much more practically difficult to express those ideas, obviously. And so, of course, you would still need the memory torture techniques shown in the books.
Yeah.
It would probably make their job significantly easier.
I mean, I think altering memory and altering the way people think is obviously the biggest stretch in the book. But I mean, just by the way that the book describes it, it was just plausible enough to kind of make me feel, claustrophobic.
It's this, like, I felt like that was kind of the pseudoscience thing that makes sense. Like, oh, in this world, in the book, that's the thing and that's how it works. Whereas, in tons of sci-fi, there's kind of that one step of fantasy to it of like, and now we've taken this one concept and made it like the biggest thing. And I felt like that was probably that one thing in 1984 of just like, okay, you played a little fantasy with how sci-fi works right here.
Right.
Altering language is a big stretch in order to get rid of certain ideas. But altering history is something that people played with for a long time, like Fahrenheit 451. Like, I think like Howard Zinn made a history book about the alternative history of the United States, like the stories that weren't told, like from the perspective of Native Americans, from the perspective of like Chinese railroad workers.
Vincent, altering history is reality. Like, this weekend I went down to LA and saw this King Tut exhibit, and one of the big things is that the people who were there after him, the reason his tomb was never found is because the people after him wiped his name from existence. And it's only through like a cup that they even knew that he was a thing. And they're like, well, we haven't found anything with this guy, so maybe he's still around someplace. Like, yeah. I mean, and it's, I teach math and science. I always tell students in my science class, like, at least one thing you have learned as fact in your science class, and I'm almost certain at least one thing that you know for certain as a fact is just blatantly wrong. Like, the future will discover something is slightly different, or there's something else we had no idea about, and we'll be those chumps, you know, like those people that we laugh at from hundreds of years ago who knew nothing about science.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I definitely
So
picked
it's
that
like-
out as interesting metaphysics, like hyperventilation based on metaphysic concepts.
And also, kind of the whole reality is what you observe and what is real. I've heard that basically, you know, what's the realest thing in reality is horrific pain. And so,
Wow.
like, through torture, you could, you know, through extended torture, you can get people to pretty much do and say whatever. And I'm like, it's only been not that many centuries that this wasn't just typical and normal and what people did. So,
They're bringing it back, is what you're
in a
saying?
book like this.
IMSOG's bringing it back.
I'm not saying, yeah, bring it back with much more specific purposes and goals versus just like lulz entertainment, like medieval times, or maybe a little more recently than medieval times. But
Yeah. Let's move on. So, you know, like I kind of said, I mean, this book definitely gave me anxiety. And part of the reason for that is at the end of the book, you just realize how screwed Winston really is. Like, the book kind of plays with your emotions. Like, you know, he lives in this dystopian future, and then he gets a little bit of an out with the Notebook, and then he gets a bigger out with Julia, his love interest, and things are great, and he's kind of getting involved in the, you know, rebellion and stuff like that. And you're like, wow, like I certainly hope Winston goes and screws the government. And then at the end, he just gets super screwed. Like, you know, you find out at the end that O'Brien's been watching him for literally years before the book even starts. You know, I didn't touch about it in the plot, but he gets the book from the Resistance Brotherhood that is supposedly detailing the history of why, you know, how the Three Nations superstructure came into place and why the power structure works as it is. That ends up being written by O'Brien, the Zealot. And even his love for Julia, he even says to her before they get captured, like, you know, nothing can take that away. Guess what happens at the end? It gets taken away. So in that way, you know, I mean, talk about, like, you know, playing with your emotions, and he just gets totally and utterly screwed and even converted to their cause before he's executed at the end of the book. So this made me really sad. I was really sad at the end of this.
Stavros, while you were giving that summary, I just had a like, oh, that's what it was moment. Because you know how O'Brien mentions the like watching you for 7 years, and I was like, is he imagining that because he had the dream about O'Brien talking to him about the Room of Darkness or something? I was like, wait, did O'Brien actually give him a message about the?
Oh yeah.
Did he actually say something 7 years ago? Because, like you said, he's been watching him for years. Like,
yeah, play something through the telescreen.
Starting the book, I was just like, how's he getting away with any of this given the way this world works? And it's like, oh, he's not. That's kind of exactly what I expected.
Yeah.
I was like, especially once he starts the thing with Julia, I was just like, none of this is going to go unpunished.
Well, he even says at the beginning of the book, he's like, you know, once it happens, it's just a matter of time till you get caught. Like, he acknowledges it, and I'm like, oh, he's just setting up drama so he can, you know, go after the government. Nope.
It's screwed. Not as blatant as Dune, but I was pretty much like, yeah, he's pretty much. So, like, you know, for his "we're already dead" line to be the moment he is caught, I was like, yeah, that's super appropriate. I thought it was going to come a little later, like once they actually like fake achieve something.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, that's a really nice, appropriate way to do it. Is, you know, once they're actually talking about the fact that they know they're going to fail, is when the government's just like, yep, pretty much.
They just jump in through the skylight with the rappel down into the room and take him out.
Yep.
I have a controversial viewpoint on this book. I feel that we are reading the book wrong. I feel that this book was actually, we're reading it from the perspective of good guys who like to see bad guys lose. Imagine instead that we were Emperor Palpatine. This is a book where plucky young lads who join the rebellion don't make it big. They don't take down Big Brother. They get killed or they get caught in the end. I feel like it's if you were a bad guy, you'd be like, hey, this is the type of book I want to read more often. But I don't know why everyone's writing to the good guys.
The scariest thing about the book is it's not even about there being bad guys. It's about a system being set up where there's enough people with enough power who buy into it, who aren't really rulers or anything like that, but just perpetuate it. Like they've set up a system that will perpetuate itself, and everyone's lives are terrible and nothing gets better. And like the only people who are happy are the people who have had it like who are either A, already insane, or B, have had it beaten into them.
You know, and I don't know if you guys have read or watched *Handmaid's Tale*, but the analogy I want to draw there is, you know, often, you know, the main character in that book is like, you know, oh, I need to get to Canada or escape to Canada and stuff like that. Whereas this, like, once you learn that the other 3 super states, and I don't even know if this information is real because it comes out of the Brotherhood book, which is completely fabricated anyway. Another way where everything you friggin' know is wrong in this book. But there's no escape. Like, even if you got to the other Eurasia or whatever, they're doing the exact same shit over there. There's just no escape from that.
Yeah.
I hate this book.
Yeah. Don't worry, Stavros. You just already live in that world. They just didn't have to torture you for it.
Don't worry, Stav. By the time this podcast is over, you will learn to love Big Brother. You'll change your opinion.
John's gonna come back and he's like, and then I realized I love subplot, of course.
We're gonna have to get him in on that when he gets back. Oh God.
So,
anyway.
so what was your Room 101 thing, John?
We're gonna have to ask him. Let's I'll work that into the intro next time.
John is back.
Better and more loving than ever.
Okay, well, all right. Well, enough about the book sadness. So, you know, like I mentioned, this book was written in 49, so quite a long time ago. But just kind of briefly touch on the tech in here. I mean, a lot of this tech that they talk about, you know, like hidden microphones and TVs, two-way TVs everywhere, probably very hard to imagine in 1949. Whereas here, I feel like this could be very easily executed under the right government circumstances.
I mean, hackers do this. They like figure out how to hack into your camera, and while your computer's off, it's watching. I mean, while you think your computer's off, it is watching you.
Yeah, literally happens.
Yeah. Like the part, my favorite thing in terms of modern understanding of this stuff is when O'Brien turns off the TV, and they're like, "It turns off." He's like, "Yeah, now we can talk about whatever they want." I'm like, "The mic's still on, dumbass."
I bet a reader in 1949 was like, "Oh, I mean, it's off, right?"
People don't lie in 1949.
I know. Come on. But no, I mean, it's just a surprising amount of foreknowledge and estimation on what kind of tech would exist, in the future. Kind of surprised me.
Mm-hmm. Like
you guys
big screens, televisions.
Yeah, two-way TVs.
Because I know televisions was a technology by then. Not sure like how much he would have known about it really.
Yeah, two-way TVs doesn't strike me as crazy as it could have been, because that's like the one piece of tech that is striking about this book. I think some of the older books which talk about time travel and some other things maybe are a little bit more pushing it, a little more interesting in terms of like the leaps of logic that they have. But this one's not bad. I mean, the fact that it's accurate is what makes it so interesting.
Right. Yeah.
So I find it more interesting the like effect it has on the people, where it's like, okay, you might even have a thought about something, but you've trained yourself to like not say it or not express it and that sort of thing. And I'm like, even without vid screens, that's kind of a scary truth about politics. Like on one hand for nicety, but on the other hand, like in case you are talking with someone who's like super devoted to a particular idea, and exactly like this, you don't want to confront them or draw attention.
Okay, well, geez, I mean, we already have burned through the time for this episode, so let's go to final thoughts. I'll go first. Once again, like these books that play with my emotions, I just don't know how I feel about this. To me, considering it was written in 49, makes a believable. I mean, there's a stretch there with like controlling people's mentality, but I can see the seeds there happening. And just me thinking about this, I'm like, oh God, this could totally happen. Gave me anxiety, and the fact that they give the main character just a little bit of hope and then crush the hell out of it at the end, just really destroyed me on the inside a little bit.
No.
So hey, if you like being destroyed, go ahead and read this book, I guess. Whatever. Go ahead, Charlie.
Probably the thing that because I've metaphysically, I've probably had the opinion that, there's science, there's everything like that. But deep, 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 deep down someplace, like everyone's reality is an expression of perception at some level. And like the greatest fear is that someone decides to use you as some kind of like horrific science experiment, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so when it got to the like last part of the book, I was like, yeah, that sounds like that would work. That's awful. Now I'm sad. But I didn't have the idea that he would get away with it or anything. I figured that was going to be the end. I didn't realize that the end was going to be as sad as it would be. But in the end, I realized I love 1984.
I feel like that was even darker than my review.
Is Charlie okay?
I don't know. Are you okay? All right, let's go to Vincent. Go ahead.
All right, so 1984. Let's start it out. 1984 is a classic. It is one of the books that everyone probably will have read at some point in their lives if they were not forced to in school by Big Brother or by Big Sister or whoever. It is. I remember the first time I ever read 1984. I thought it was a very interesting book, but it was because I didn't have that much sci-fi underneath my belt at the time when I read the book. So I remember reading it thinking, oh, this is a very interesting, a very novel approach to sci-fi / dystopia, because I wasn't super tired of reading, Fahrenheit 451 and a bunch of other types of books. As an older sci-fi reader nowadays, I think I find it a little too straightforward, a little bit too deterministic, a little too dystopian. There are a lot of ways to write novels nowadays where you can still have all the dystopia and still have a terrible thing happen to the character in the end, but there was no it didn't feel like this book was very dynamic. It was very monotone.
Right, one note kind of a thing.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's very boring when you're reading it because you know that bad things are happening and bad things will happen. The guy's like, I'm about to get caught. I'm definitely going to die. All these things kind of happen. You're like, yeah, you are. And I don't know why I'm reading this book because I know the ending already. You probably do have to read the book at least one point in your life because especially if you like sci-fi, because it's part of history. It's an old-timey classic. It's it's staple. Yeah. But would you read it again? Would you really enjoy it? Would you recommend it to other people? I guess I am technically recommending it to other people, but I don't think that you'll enjoy yourself very much when you're reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly a feel-good novel.
No,
it's more canon.
I was gonna say one of the things I did like about it is just how brutal it is. It's not like Brave New World where it kind of pulls the everyone, most people are happy, but it's just one guy realizes how screwed up it is. It's the one person who sees the world it really is. No, 1984 is everyone's unhappy, but we've set up something where power is concentrated in this thing that isn't even people, and life sucks, and everyone's lives are ruined, and it's never gonna end. I liked the fact that he was willing to go that far with it and be like, here's the world if the Nazis win, type thing. Don't you love 1984, Vincent?
I think I used to love 1984. I think the brainwashing's worn off. I'm due for a refresh. I can't wait to see how John feels after his spiffy new brainwash when he comes back.
I'll have to grill him.
I can speak for him right now. He says, torture Vincent, let the rats eat his face instead of mine.
Jeez. Okay.
At least we'll know where Vincent went for next episode.
Or why I look a little bit disfigured.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for this episode. And as usual, if you have feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcourse@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And for next month's episode, we're going to be talking about 11/22/63, another novel that only has the numbers at its title, not confusing at all.
Nope.
By Stephen King, was published in 2011. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Look forward to the fact that we're not reading an old-timey book next month. Tune in. Yay. Same bat time, same bat channel.
No, the copyrights. Why, Vince?